maybe I'll take this opportunity to first acknowledge the traditional owners. The University of Queensland acknowledges the traditional owners and their custodianships of the lands on which we meet. We pay our respects to their ancestors and their descendants who continue cultural and spiritual connections to country. We recognize their valuable contributions to Australian and global society. Okay. I think we should get going. Okay, so I've known Eamonn for a few years, and I'm really happy to see some of his new work. I did get a sneak peek, and it is pretty cool. So Eamonn did his PhD at the University of Technology, Sydney, under Arian Wallish, who is actually now at QUT, although you will not find them there very often because they work remote, but some very cool work on predators across Australia. Then he moved to Charles Sturt University, where he works at the Gabali Institute. Am I saying that right? Yeah?
Yep, that's correct.
And so he's been a postdoc there. He has a few different roles. And now he is staying for a few more years with Professor Dale Nemo, who many people will know. It's a big name in Australian wildlife ecology. So what I like about his work and how he describes himself is really combining a variety of methods together, such as field research with meta-analyses and looking across scales, both in terms of time. So he has some cool papers looking at predators, how they their traits change over very long time horizons, like millennia, and also at different scales. So stuff locally within Australia and then globally as well, which I think we may hear more about the global stuff today. So with that, thank you, Eamonn, and looking forward to hearing your talk.
Cool. Thanks, Matt. And thanks to Kate for organizing. Yeah, before I get started as well, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the Darug and the Gundara, traditional owners, custodians, and elders whose land that I live and work on. Today, I'm going to be talking about a project from my fellowship here at Charles Sturt University, talking about how humans influence prey interactions. So this all kind of starts a story a long time ago, between 2 and 6 million years ago, when humans emerged, and we rather quickly started hunting animals and influencing their ecologies, like the early humans of South America who hunted these car-sized armadillos known as glyptodons. And the impacts of humans have only really accelerated since our emergence. In the late Pleistocene, we see a transition from an Earth system with no or negligible human influence towards epochs with more widespread and strong human influence. So humans emerged as hunter-gatherers, and we gradually spread across the unglaciated continents. And we see this in the megafauna decline record. We then move into the Holocene, which is an epoch that constitutes ubiquitous occurrence of humans across all of the continents except Antarctica. And we see the global spread of things like agriculture, which led to widespread ecosystem transformations, which you see in D. And then the Anthropocene, which starts around 1950. It's debated, but marks a new phase with clear planetary signatures of human impacts on the Earth system. And notably, we see this through changes in the atmosphere, through biotic globalization, and through these really massive landscape changes. So ecologists and other scholars have been really interested in how humans are shaping the world around us for a really long period of time. And this paper by Earl C. Ellis in PNAS and colleagues showed that humans have shaped most of terrestrial nature for at least the last 12,000 years, and 12,000 years is since the Holocene. And we see that humans are unique in the way that they hunt. They hunt other animals. They're not comparable to non-human predators. And that's because they kill adult prey about 14 times as often as non-human predators. And this killing of adults is really unique, and it hampers the reproductive capacities of these populations. We also see that the direct killing from humans of other animals directly influences these populations more than other human or more than natural disturbances. And what this all kind of culminates into is this, what's been called a trophic downgrading of planet Earth, where we've lost the largest species that humans tend to hunt. But we also see this in smaller species like the extinction record here in Australia. So this is the Human Footprint Index, which captures basically human disturbance across the planet. And as you can see here in 2009, we had an influence on most of the world. But this mostly captures things like urbanization and agriculture, and it misses more fine scale and sometimes lethal disturbances, things like predator control, that can really reshape ecological communities and influence how animals interact with one another. So we're more familiar with this lethal disturbance, humans directly killing and reducing populations and driving decline and extinction. This is this defaunation that we hear lots about. And this is a really prevalent threat to nature globally. But what's really emerging in current literature is that there's these non-lethal, low-impact human activities that can have large and lasting impacts on animals. So if you take hiking, for example, it's typically thought to be low impact. It's important to human well-being, but it can displace animals for long periods of time, altering their ecology and their physiology and their fitness. And these ideas really came to a head in this science paper led by Caitlin Gaynor in 2018. And they took studies that looked at how humans were influencing the temporal patterns of wildlife. And what they show is that there's this really clear pattern of nocturnality, that animals are more likely to be nocturnal in high disturbance areas compared to low disturbance areas. And one of the key things that they're discussing in this paper is that these shifts to nocturnality might be reshaping species interactions. They might have consequences beyond just the animals that are becoming more nocturnal. So we really apply this concern in this project to predator-prey interactions. And predators are really important to ecosystems globally. They reshape prey densities, they influence prey behavior, they drive what we call trophic cascades, leading to predators indirectly shaping things like carbon pathways and climate and primary productivity. But these interactions are also uniquely vulnerable to human disturbance when humans are reshaping the spatial temporal patterns of animals, because predator-prey interactions require animals to be present, both predators and prey to be present in both space and time for these interactions to occur. And this makes them distinct from other ecological interactions like plant pollinator or plant herbivore interactions, where one member of the interaction is immobile. So when we think about predator-prey interactions, one helpful framework to do this in is the predation sequence. And this starts with the degree to which predators and prey overlap in space and time, and then moves through encounter and attack and capture or escape. And today what we're really focusing on is this spatiotemporal overlap between predators and prey. And the main reason for this is it's the only real stage of the predation sequence that's ready for full-scale meta-analytic synthesis. And this is really due to the camera trap boom over the last decade, as so many ecologists have taken up working with camera traps and putting them out across disturbed and undisturbed landscapes. So when we think about this spatiotemporal overlap, predators and prey might partition in space. So prey might avoid predation by being in a different location to their predators. They might partition in time, so they might be in the same place, but a different time of day. But when humans are active during the day and they're making animals more nocturnal, what happens to these interactions that are partitioned in space and time? We arise at questions like, can prey avoid predation if their predators are becoming nocturnal? Or a diurnal prey who aren't shifting, are they losing their predators? And Van Scoyoc and colleagues in 2023, last year, in the Journal of Animal Ecology, really took a synthetic approach to understanding this idea. So they present this framework on an axis of predator attraction to humans, predator avoidance of humans, and then the same for prey on the x-axis. And we see these distinct scenarios where predator attraction may result in historic prey being freed of predation, while predators prey shift to more urban adapted species. And then we see mutual attraction, mutual avoidance, which might result in similar or intensified interactions. And then we see prey refuge, which could also be understood as a human shield effect, where prey are protected from predators as prey move towards people. So the question we're really trying to get at with this project is, does human disturbance create spatiotemporal mismatches between predators and prey? And before we go into methods and results, there's just a few key collaborators on the project that need to be acknowledged. Caitlin Gaynor, Dale Nimmo, who are co-senior authors on the project, and then Shinichi Nakagawa, who's been our meta-analysis expert on the project. So our objectives were really to determine how human disturbance alters how predators and prey overlap in space and time, and we wanted to do this macroecologically, so globally. And we want to compare patterns of disruption across species and disturbance types. So a bit about how we selected papers for our meta-analysis. So the inclusion criteria, the paper needed to have data on the spatial or temporal overlap between predators and prey. We needed data from a comparable low and high human disturbance time or place. And this is actually a really interesting point to note out that we actually really early on in the study, we had to actually drop our spatial component because very, very few papers present a metric of overlap or a meta-analyzable data point. Instead, most studies present model outputs, things like conditional occupancy, and we really can't meta-analyze that without a mean and a standard error. So we had to drop that component. So moving on, we're just talking about temporal overlap from now on, which was an unfortunate reality for the project. So an example of the kind of papers we're sourcing, this paper published in Oikos, predator control alters wolf interactions with prey and competitor species across the diel cycle. So they present the temporal overlap between wolf and deer pre and post predator control. So what we did is we extracted these overlap values, presented as delta 4 often, and their associated 95% confidence intervals. And this really quantifies the degree to which predators and prey overlap in time. So then we converted confidence intervals into standard error, and then we converted the associated errors into a variance-covariance matrix, and this allowed us to account for species and study non-independence. And then the effect size that we used was this was a logit transformation of overlap, and we did all the same thing with those error structures as well. And this structure, this experimental design allowed us to get this control and experiment that we need for meta-analysis. So into a few results now. We found 49 studies, 420 predator-prey pairs, and we found a variety of disturbance types. So urbanization, things like rural to urban, comparisons, resource extraction inside and outside of mine sites, protected areas, we have inside and outside of a national park, predator control, so before and after, or a spatial comparison, human presence, that's usually a numerical number of low versus high human presence, habitat loss, so things like habitat fragmentation versus non-fragmented habitats, agriculture, presence, absence of livestock, and then we have an aggregate measure, which is people who use things like a human footprint index or a habitat integrity index. And then what we did is we did a phylogenetic multi-level meta-analysis with all this data. And because we have two phylogenies, both predator and prey, we had to do dual phylogenetic non-independence. We had to correct for both phylogenies. And what this basically means is there's a model with about 7 random effects in there. So onto our first set of results. On the x-axis, we have the change in the logit of temporal overlap, and on the right means more overlap in disturbed areas, and on the left means less. And what we found here is that the 95% confidence intervals overlap 0, and what we conclude is that there's no overall effect of human disturbance on temporal overlap between predators and prey. So next, we're looking at disturbance type. And on the right, we have each of our disturbance types, and you'll see each of those 95% confidence intervals overlaps with 0. So we conclude that disturbance type really had no effect on temporal overlap. I guess the interesting thing here is that lethal and non-lethal disturbances have the same effect, which is also the same as things like urbanization, big landscape scale habitat restructuring. Importantly, though, not all of these traits, or not all these interactions are the same. Species level traits like body mass and social hunting and hunting method determine which predators present threats to which prey. So these differences in species level traits may have obscured instances where human disturbance can reshape predator-prey interactions, given that species traits also determine the effects that humans have on animals. So we tested a variety of traits, body mass, pairwise activity timing, and a bunch of others shown in this figure, to see how traits influence disturbances' effect on predator-prey interactions. And we found just one significant effect. So on our x-axis here is log prey body mass, and then our y-axis is again that change in temporal overlap. And we found this marginally significant relationship between prey body mass and the effect that disturbance has on predator-prey overlap, really leading us to conclude that predator-prey interactions are intensified by human disturbance as prey body mass increases. So that is that the largest prey species are more likely to encounter predators in time, the larger they are. But we didn't find this effect for predator body mass, and this is likely because predators just don't get as large in this data set as some of the prey species do. So next, we really wanted to understand why there was no overall change in overlap between low and high disturbance areas, because there's really two key scenarios that this could be explained by. Do neither species shift at all? Does human disturbance have no effect? Or is there a mutual change in behavior? So we took a subset of this data set and included data on, studies that included data on the temporal patterns of individual species. So what we did is we split the predator-prey dyad into its two members. For example, we have wolf and deer. We extracted or calculated the overlap for each of those between low and high disturbance. So we took the overlap for wolves in low and high and the overlap for deer in low and high. And this allowed us to ask the question, how did each member of the interaction shift their activity across low and high disturbance? So the results for that, again, our effect size was the logit of overlap, but we didn't take the difference this time because it didn't make sense to. And the x-axis is back transformed from logit to make it, convert it back to kind of plain English, make it a lot easier to understand for the reader. Our effect size is on the right, so we have 277 from 27 of our studies. And what we found is that there's this small but mutual shift. And if you back transform that from our model estimates, what you see is that there's a 15% shift in both predators and prey, which is really that means that the lack of overall effect we're seeing in our data is driven by mutual behavioral plasticity to human disturbance, that both predators and prey shift in response, and that maintains their interactions in time. So the first kind of thing I was thinking when I got these results was, well, does this mean there's preserved ecological function in high disturbance areas? So I got reading in the literature because we found almost identical temporal shifting preserves predator access to prey in high disturbance areas. But there's a vast body of literature that really shows that the other effects that humans have on predators may be causing functional redundancy, functional extinction in predators. So whether it's through lethal pathways like the loss of predators themselves, or behavioral pathways like predators in high disturbance areas abandon their kills. They hunt more prey, but they also can prey shift, hunting different prey. So we might see the functional extinction of some relationships or the complete shift of some relationships to not exist anymore at all. This mutual shifting was supported by this meta-analysis I showed earlier, showing that all trophic levels really shift towards nocturnality, which is very similar to what we're finding, that there's this mutual shifting that preserves relationships. So the next kind of path of thinking was about the eco-evolutionary consequences of this avoidance, is that understanding how predator-prey interactions continue to adapt to disturbance is really important to preserving their function. And we see that a shift from humans is really creating new selection pressures for wildlife. And there's a really clear body of literature that shows that human disturbance reshapes morphology, it reshapes behavior, and it alters the physiology of wildlife. And predicting and the trajectories of these novel evolutionary pathways is really challenging. But people, ecologists are really trying, and evolutionary biologists are really trying to understand what the future of these interactions looks like. So this paper by Guyton et al. And Tree, they make the argument that predator-prey interactions in the modern day exist in distinct contrast to those of the recent past, that they take place with novel actors in novel places, and they have novel ecological outcomes. And this makes predicting how predator-prey interactions are going to continue to change into the future, predicting their ecological effects into the future, really challenging. So this paper shows that human disturbance has an undesirable evolutionary consequence. We might be driving animals to reduce their fitness. Bighorn sheep's body size and horn size rapidly decrease through time as driven by human trophy hunting selection pressures. As humans drove pressures for larger animals and larger trophies, the reproductive capacity of this population was hampered as all the large individuals were slowly, or the largest individuals were slowly removed from that population. Species introduction can also reshape top predators. So snail kites in Florida, their primary prey species was outcompeted by a species of introduced snail. And in response to this, they, within 10 generations, grew much larger beaks and much larger bodies, so they could then start hunting these larger snails, really rapid evolution. And then this recent paper out in Nature and Ecology Evolution, really exploring and trying to think about what mismatches will occur under future anthropogenic change, under future climate change. But yeah, it's a really challenging field to continue to predict how these interactions will continue to change or not change. And like the last kind of point I want to make is about the the prey body size relationship that we found. Many megafauna are threatened by and endangered by overhunting and poaching and climate change and habitat destruction, like the Asiatic wild ass here is. And we identified that the largest prey species on Earth in our data set are more likely to encounter a predator in high disturbance areas. And we think this could present an additional human pressure on some of the world's most at-risk species. And we really think that local scale research across the entire predation sequence, from spatiotemporal overlap to capture, would really help inform local management strategies and conservation strategies, with the questions really being, do increase encounter rates result in more kills? So kind of conclusions from this study so far: we found no macroecological pattern of human disturbance in general, and then across disturbance types as well. Larger prey species experience intensified interactions, at least in time. Unfortunately, we can't comment on in space. And we found that mutual behavioral plasticity maintains predator-prey overlap, at least in time. So we're still wrapping up this project. We've got a few things to do before we submit, but really focusing on bolstering that single species analysis by linking it back to the original larger data set. We want to link changes in single species patterns to shifts in overlap, and that analysis is almost done. I'm just finishing it at the moment, but it's not ready to be shared. And then we're going to submit the paper. So that's all from me. I have lots of people to thank for this project, though. That's the full list of co-authors on the manuscript. Everyone did a wonderful job sorting through 15,000 titles we started with. This is a really large project. All the authors who provided data when I reached out, many people were really gracious with data sharing and helping me understand their data. Again, Matt Luskin and Kate for organizing. And the last note is I'll be at ISBE next week. If anyone's around and wants to chat, or if anyone wants to hear more in depth about the project, just send me an email as well. Thank you.